And speaking of, thank you. What an amazing transition, Rob.
Yeah.
Speaking of ditching, Sully was not the first one to pull off a zero fatality ditching. Not to take away from the miracle flight and the wonderful outcome of that day, but recently Kyle found a fantastic article about Captain Richard Ogg. And he posted it on the Aviation Information or Business Information Board on Facebook. And I looked at it and I kind of saved it. And I was looking at this cargo incident, and it's another ditching. And I just thought, wow, let's focus on some positive information here. And that wonderful day, Captain Ogg and his open ocean ditching on a flight from San Francisco to Honolulu that had a similar outcome to the Miracle flight, that happened 73 years before the Hudson ditching. This story was published on August 2nd of 2015. It was published in avgeekery.com. The title of the article is Pan Am Flight 6 Safely Ditched in the Ocean 53 Years Before Sully Ditched in the Hudson. And we just wanted to focus a little bit on that today. The article goes on to state that we all know Sully became a hero when he ditched his U.S. Airways Airbus A320 in the Hudson River after bird strikes took out both engines on Flight 1549 in 2009. But Sully was not the first pilot to ditch an airliner and not lose a passenger or crew member. One of the lesser known but equally amazing instances of a ditching with all souls on board surviving the event occurred on October 16th, 1956, when a Pan Am American World Airways Boeing 377 Stratocaster flying as Pan Am Flight 6 was forced to ditch in the open ocean, roughly about halfway between Honolulu and San Francisco. And thanks to a YouTuber, a Periscope film page, they uploaded a Coast Guard film about Flight 6. The film itself is, I don't want to play it because I'm sure there's some kind of copyright there because it's a produced film, but I'll put the link of the article in the show notes. The flight, it originally left Philadelphia as a DC-6B and proceeded to Honolulu after stopping in San Francisco. After the flight stopped in San Francisco, it switched equipment to a 377 Clipper Sovereign of the Skies for the trip back to San Fran. Just after passing the decision point, and we've talked about ETOPS flights before, they experienced engine problems that forced the crew to shut down first one and later the other outboard Pratt & Whitney R4360 engines, 1 and 4. Unable to make San Francisco or return to Honolulu due to reduced power and the windmilling prop on number 1, a Mayday call was broadcast by the crew.
Maintaining the United States Coast Guard Mid-Pacific Vigil at Ocean Station November, that night was a U.S. Owasco-class Coast Guard cutter Pontchartrain HWEC-70. Fortunately for the passengers and crew of Flight 6, the Pontchartrain was able to prepare to assist the survivors after the Sovereign ditched. During the previous year, a 377 had been forced to ditch off the Oregon coast. The 37 was Pan Am 845-26. I'm not sure what that means. That aircraft broke up when the tail section broke off the airframe on initial impact. The crew of the Sovereign moved all passengers forward so the tail was empty of passengers.
After flying orbits around the Pontchartrain until sunrise in order to burn off fuel, which would allow the plane to float longer on the water, the pilots flew several practice approaches in order to determine the lowest possible speed at which the 377 would remain controllable for ditching. At 0540 early local time, the pilot command, Richard Ogg, radioed the Pontchartrain, saying that he was preparing to ditch the aircraft in order to align the approach of the 377 into the wind for the lowest possible approach speed, and to help Ogg determine his height above the water. The Pontchartrain used firefighting foam to indicate 315 degrees on the surface of the Pacific. A veteran pilot with more than 13,000 flight hours over 20 years in the air, Ogg made his approach and ditched at 0615 local time. All on board the Sovereign survived the ditching with minimal injuries, despite the aircraft breaking into two large pieces just aft of the wing trailing edge after one wing hit a swell and caused the 377 to rotate. The crew and the passengers deployed 3 life rafts. Everyone was into life rafts within minutes, and the Pontchartrain's crew assisted with boats from the cutter. By the time the wreckage sank 20 minutes after impact, all sorts on board the Sovereign were in the Coast Guard care.
The Pontchartrain bore the passengers of Flight 6 to their original destination, San Francisco, several days later. The flight crew of the Sovereign of the Seas was 43-year-old pilot and card-carrying badass Captain Richard N. Ogg and 40-year-old First Officer George L. Hacker. 31-year-old navigator Richard L. Brown, 30-year-old flight engineer Frank Garcia Jr., and 30-year-old purser Patricia Reynolds, assisted by 24-year-old stewardess Mary Ellen Daniel and 23-year-old stewardess Catherine S. Arkai. What an amazing story. You know, we forget about all of those that came before us and survived these really amazing ditching and crashing, and they did it right. And there's something to be said about knowing your history. A lot of us in aviation, you know we love to fly. We get in the airplane, we train, we work on our ratings, we get our pilot certificates, and we work on everything, and we get in there and we work our butts off to get a job, and then we work there for years and maybe decades, and then move on and fly bigger and better things. But we rarely take the time to look back and see all of the amazing. We hear about the major crashes, we hear about the Sullys of the world, we hear about all the modern stuff, but do we really go back and really learn about the history of what we do, of our profession? And I want to say thank you to Kyle for finding that article and posting it, because I had no idea that this had happened, and it was really nice to kind of see it. And again, the link will be in the show notes. You'll see this Coast Guard video. It's I think about 15 minutes long. It's actually a pretty good video. I was watching it right before the show, and it's clearly produced. So the voiceover is funny. It's a very old timey news article kind of thing. But yeah, really cool event, and thank you for sharing that.